Well, hello. Please take your seats.
Bien, perfecto. Gracias.
So thank you very much. Please take your seats. We really need to start now. So good evening, everyone. After such a day, such a complete and intense day, I wanted to thank you for being here. And we're going to start a very, very interesting and also complex table. I have with me Diego Blázquez, Mauricio Valiente, Rosa García Alcón, excuse me, it is Alcón, Luis Naranjo, and Martina Valverde. Excuse me, Martina Velarde, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. Well, this is the session dedicated to the legal framework and the public policies on the topic of memory, the historic memory law, and the democratic memory law of Andalusia. So recently, the Parliament has approved the project of democratic memory that seeks to strengthen the commitment towards the seek of justice for the violence committed during the Franco regime. So the law seeks to denounce also all the crimes made during the last part of the Franco regime as well. And we believe that Spain has finally a law that gives the priority to the victims. This law also is also considered humanitarian and is in the framework of the principles of reparation and justice, the international principles of reparation and justice. So all these experts that I just introduced are here to broach this topic. These men and women have played an important role in the promotion of this law, and they are going to control the application of this law. And now they're going to discuss about all the strength of the law, the weaknesses as well. So it is a great privilege to have them here today. So if it is good for you, we're going to start with Martina Velarde. You weren't here, but you're going to be. We have decided that, but you're going to be the first one. Well, Martina Velarde Gómez was born in Rota on the 14th of April in 1979. She holds a degree in law by the University of Granada. She's a lawyer and she is General Secretary of the political party Podemos in Andalusia, and she's a deputy in the Andalusian Parliament. She feels really lucky to have the chance to fight from different front lines in order for Andalusia not to lag behind anymore. She's been involved in the promotion of the law, the historical memory law, in order to condemn the Franco regime crimes. I'm sorry, I've said your date of birth. I'm so sorry. It was just, I had it written down, so I just said it, sorry. The floor is yours, Martina. All right, can you hear me? Okay, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. Congratulations as well to all the organizers for this first International Congress of La Desbandá. I hope there will be many more editions of this Congress that I find absolutely necessary. So thank you very much again for the invitation. When I received this invitation several months ago to discuss with you about the democratic memory law, I wasn't even sure that the law was going to be approved by today and also published in the State Journal. But it is true that the law is now passed at the Parliament and published at the State Journal, finally. Whenever I make an intervention at the Parliament, not only to promote this law, but also to broach other topics, I like to start by thanking, because we talk many times of the parent of the Constitution, but we do not talk about the parents who brought us our liberties, our freedoms, and our democracy. And if I look around here, I see many faces and see many people who lived this period, the transition period. And I think we have to be thankful to these people for so many years of fighting, of struggle. Our parents, our grandparents, who brought the democracy. And as for us, as a political party, we also have to apologize because we arrived 45 years late. I know there is already a law, number 47, but it wasn't enough because there were not enough mechanisms to apply the law. And that was the case of the 2007 law. What do we do now with the new one, with the new law? We want to go a little bit further. We establish a sanction regime, sanction mechanisms, in order to fully apply this law, and in order also to eliminate some elements that were, or to bring about some elements that were missing before. I've worked with Enrique Santiago, who is the secretary of the Spanish Communist Party, and we have been the representatives of Unidas Podemos at the Congress. It has been a very hard work, a very hard journey. We started in this project in 2020. And 2 years ago, in September 2020, we presented our bill. We thought the draft of the bill was really not enough, and we started negotiations with the Socialist Party in order to add modifications, amendments, and make improvements of the bill. So we worked with the memory movement, and then we drafted amendments, modifications of the law, and we communicated all these changes to the Socialist Party. And then the bill is presented in July 2021. So after reaching different agreements with the Socialist Party, we kept on working with the other political parties in order to finally present 42 amendments. So we had the impression that everything was going quite fast, but in the end, it was not like this, because the Socialist Party stops all these proceedings of the law because they wanted to reach agreements with other political parties. So we had to wait a little longer, and then we started with all the paperwork, we can say. So we present the amendments, we negotiate with all the political parties, and of course we had to confront amendments against the whole law by the Popular Party, by Ciudadanos, and by Vox. Their statements in the parliament were really sad, really strong, and they were really absolutely offensive for the victims and for our parents. And finally, in July 22, the bill is passed and it goes to the Senate. There were 500 amendments at the Senate, and we didn't know if it was going to pass or not, but finally the text stays the way it was, and it is published in the State Journal. It has been a very long journey with a lot of participation by the memory movement. We cannot say it is our law, the law of Unidas Podemos, because it is the result of a great consensus. Because if we had more power in the parliament, the law would have been different, but we were not a majority force, so we make part of government agreements, and we have worked to have the greater consensus as possible. So we have always been more ambitious, and we would have liked to go a little bit farther, but we're still satisfied. We consider it a good step. We believe the democratic memory law is a success. There is no doubt about it. And the 2007 law was never applied because there were not enough mechanisms to do so. But now it changes. Before we didn't have the instruments to stop the permanent sabotage of the right parties. But now we do. Now we have these mechanisms. And I would like to highlight the greatest progress we've made. Today, Francoism is illegal in our country. The coup of 1936 is condemned, and the Franco regime is considered illegal, is declared illegal. And all the amnesty issues will be interpreted according to international law and humanitarian law. There are going to be genocide crimes, crimes against humanity that are going to be in place. It's not going to be possible to prevent any judge from researching, from inquiring these kind of crimes. And this is according to Article 2.3. So, besides that, we acknowledge every people and the families who suffered any kind of repression by the Franco regime. And all the sentences, all the condemnations that suffered, the fighters for freedom are going to be considered cancelled, void. And now with Article 4 of the law, these sentences are going to be considered void, invalid. All the sentences that they suffered because of the Franco regime. It is very important also to establish the necessary mechanisms to apply the law. So we're going to create a DNA bank in order to identify the victims, and in order to identify the stolen children, there's going to be an authority to fight against all, or to make researches about all these crimes. And we're going to have a census for the recovery and the defense of all the documentary material, the documentary patrimony. And all the acts that are opposite to the democratic memory need to be stopped also. We are also going to include in the education, the curricula, we're going to include information about this period and memory contents on the subject of history. And there's going to be tributes, acknowledgements, compensations, or all the commemorations of persons who were involved in the Franco regime or in the oppression or in the repression activities of Franco. They're going to be cancelled as well. So all the aristocratic titles awarded between 1948 and 1978 are going to be cancelled as well. We will have a consultation body that will include memory associations as well, and we're going to create a democratic memory center in order to give visibility to the memory of victims. There's going to be researches on the potential cases of violations of human rights of the victims. There are going to be reparation actions for all the crimes happened between 1968 and December 1983. So there's going to be an acknowledgement for the victims killed during that period, when we were already in democracy. And to finish, I'd like to highlight the second chapter of the law that starts with a very special mention to the active role of women of the country in the struggle for democracy, for the values of equality and solidarity that is cross-sectoral and that appears in every domain. Women were active players of the intellectual, political, trade union life, and they suffered rapes, violations, insults, because they were fighting or because they were daughters or wives of men that had been victims of repression. We're going to seek for children separated from their families. That was a particular kind of repression against women. Justice is going to be made in this field too. So, as I said before, this is not the ideal law that we wanted, but it is still a very important step forward. We're going to have more budget as well, more funding to apply all these measures. And I believe that our democracy today, we have it thanks to Blas Infante, Enrique Ruano, José María García Caparrós, Luis Companys, the workers of the olive cultures in San Juan de Aznafarache, Manuel Sánchez, the brother of our comrade here, or the last Republican mayor of Córdoba, who was shot with 19 board members and 60 of public officers. So to all of them, to all the women and to all the people that I cannot mention in this intervention, thank you so much for fighting for democracy. Thank you for fighting for freedom.
Gracias, Martina Velarde.
Thank you, Martina Velarde. Thank you so much for giving us all the details of the legal framework of this law. Thank you for your work and your fight. And I'll give the floor to Diego Blázquez.
Bueno, Diego Blázquez, doctor en Derecho por la Universidad.
Has a PhD in the University Carlos III in Madrid. In 2018, he was a counselor for the first vice president of the government. He has got a very long institutional experience as advisor and coordinator, and he's been a member of the departments on equality, gender equality. That was in 2009-2010. Also, in the City Council of Madrid, since October 16 till 18, he was advisor for Manuela Carmena, the mayor of Madrid, and he also worked in the sports and youth department of that same city. He is currently General Director of Democratic Memory since the 29th of January 2020. You have the floor. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to be here. And thank you so much for having invited me to participate in this Congress. The Desbandá has been something to which I have devoted many hours of my work. This year, we've got an exhibition in the Unicaja Foundation in Malaga until the 31st. And that's the opportunity for me to talk to you about my exhibition. So tomorrow it will be closed, and I'm not sure if they're going to start disassembling the exhibition on Monday. I don't know how this is going to be organized, but in any case, I suppose you can find the information about that. So I just wanted to refer to the exhibition on La Desbandá, and again, thank you so much for your invitation. I want to be very brief because I know that you've been here for many hours listening to many contributions and also discussing different thoughts with Martina and my other colleagues in the panel. I don't know. I'd like to give you the chance for questions later on, because perhaps that could be very interesting. Mauricio and we have been working on topics related to the human rights, and sometimes I'm afraid that if we really promote the principles of truth, justice, reparation and the guarantee of non-repetition, we might forget about the fight against torture. And I don't want to torture you because I know it's Saturday evening and it's we're close to torture at this time of the day. Well, I'd like to share some of my personal thoughts about the drafting of the law. And in any case, well, Martina referred to the important elements of the law and so on. But there are two thoughts I'd like to share with you. First of all, this law is very complex because many actors have been participated in it. That's interesting. Participation, pluralism. We've been listening to many different actors. The process started in June of the year 2020. That's because there was a first stage of public participation, public audience, initial one that with a lot of participation, with many suggestions, many contributions and ideas. Also, at the same time, we opened the Secretary of State and myself and many of the advisors that are members of the team, very well-known people, Paco Echeverría, who knows a lot about exhumation, Paco Fernández in the anthropological area, also another colleague from Andalusia, Mr. Barrera. All of us, we really wanted to be open to contributions, and we spent many hours listening to what people had to tell us on the phone, on also online, because that was right through the pandemic, you know. So we started working on this bill in the middle of the COVID crisis. And for those of you who are know a bit of how the parliament works,
esta grave contingencia que...
Well, you need to understand how things were more complex during this pandemic and the situation we all suffered in the country. In any case, one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here is because I have the opportunity to meet some of the people with whom I've been talking for many months. Miguel Vaquero, Manuel Remedios, Mauricio. So many people I've been talking to for so long during these months. Well, I've learned so much from you. And I've met many people, not only the ones I mentioned, but also Fausto Canales and Antonio Deza from Córdoba. Absolutely admirable figures. I remember what Blázquez Montalban said. Anti-Francoism is one of the most noble efforts and one of the efforts that should be remembered by everyone, but also because of the value of the peoples who are member of that movement. And this is a great value of this country. The two people I just mentioned are persons that have been fighting for extraordinary goals, extremely high human values, and they should be known because, you know, they really show that they're the opposite of what some people say about those people in the memory movement wanting to seek for revenge and things like that. And these are people that have an extraordinary generosity. They are 90 years old and they have sacrificed a lot because they wanted to make sure that democracy would work. And they were convinced that it was worthwhile sacrificing personal fights or conflicts for the true construction of democracy. And I think this is extraordinary and it should be known by everyone. It should be made public. Second thought I wanted to share with you is that the public memory policy should be relaunched and consolidated through initiatives like this. Well, this year we've had the anniversary of the March on Rome, and there's been a lot of information about that on the media, the press, and so on. And it's really significant because it was the 100-year anniversary of that march, and we have many 100 years anniversaries every day, but it's wonderful that this has been attracting so much attention in El País, we had 2 pages of an interview with a historian discussing this march. Julián Casanova today, I think in Info Libre, also published an article on this. Today, again, in El País, there's another article on the creation of a political anti-fascist party in Italy. So, of course, this 100-year anniversary is something that we may have every day, but in this case, a lot of attention has been paid to this. Maria Zanfrano said, the history doesn't repeat itself, it just doesn't disappear. And we can say the same thing about problems. So we see in our societies a lack of understanding of what the democratic system truly is. And it's a paradox, because the European project was a moment where there was a clear will to make sure that history would not be repeated. And there's this moral value of the European project is never again. Never again these events should take place. And now we are in a situation in society where we need to say now again more than ever, because we are at a situation where we see a risk of the emergence of very dark things. Of course, it's not like in the 20s or the 30s, not the same risks, but denying the value of culture, of the social struggles, the social, economic and cultural rights, and so on. So that's the reason why, not only in Spain, but in many other countries too, we see the public memory or collective memory policies reappearing with force. And many explain this linked to identity issues, but in my opinion, this is we're progressing, because for the first time, their identity is not linked to religion, the nation, or the race. We want to consolidate our identity as Democrats. The identity in the fight for human dignity and human rights and so on. For me, this is a clear proof of progress. And precisely because of this, well, all these public memory policies are very much criticized. And then taking that into account, what we need to do to those who criticize them is the actual purpose of the law. Martina did not refer to something that I'd like to highlight in relation to the law, and that is that, the educational value, because we need to invest in educate, teach values, explain how a democracy works, what respecting fundamental rights means, how difficult it is to build a democracy. An example would be that, well, not only in Spain, but also in other places, we are demonizing trade unions, and we see that trend. And we need to understand that the roots of the advances in social, economic, and cultural rights are in trade unions and the workers' movement. And we need to understand that to avoid facing a future where we will have no way to protect our rights as workers. So in the law, there are many specific measures, and some of them are already ongoing, because the passing of the law has been so complex and long that, well, when the education law was passed, those measures were incorporated in the secondary education curricula, both compulsory one and final years. So we want to have citizens that will be committed to values and will also be critical. will have a critical spirit. I believe that the great moral foundation of European democracies is the fight against fascism and also the guaranteeing human dignity. Of course, this cannot be expressed in the same terms as it was expressed in the 30s or the 40s. We need to update that to the current times, but we must remember the spirit and the heart of that. And in the most, well, the law should invest particularly in everything that is linked to education, awareness raising, and measures related to the dissemination of the principles and values of truth, justice, reparation, and the guarantee of non-repetition. So I wanted to share these thoughts, but of course, I'll be happy to participate in the discussion and answer any questions you may have about the law. The law 2022 of the 19th of October. I've referred to this as the bill for so long that now it's difficult for me to say law.
Mauricio Valiente, licenciado. Seguimos. Licenciado.
So he studied law in the University Complutense of Madrid. He's got a wonderful PhD in the University Carlos III of Madrid. He's specialized in human rights. He was a member of the council in the City Council of Madrid, and he also was a member of Izquierda Unida in Madrid. He's the coordinator of Izquierda Unida in the parliament, and he's in charge of democratic memory in the Communist Party of Spain. You can take the floor. Thank you very much. And well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge all the work you've been carrying out during these days here in the first International Congress. I find that everything that is being done is very useful for me, and I'm sure that this is going to be positive for you all. And I have something to ask you all. I'd like to ask you all for a favor. I'd like you to read the law. It's a bit complex because it's long, but it really gives us so many tools for what we do, for our work in social activism. For those who work in education, for those who work in the institutions. Well, in municipalities, they will have a lot to do. So please do an effort and read the law, because besides the assessment we can make of the law, as Martina said earlier, well, it's not the perfect law, and many may have different opinions about it, but it's the essential thing of this law is that it should be translated into tools that will help us work. So, recently I read in the book by Ángel Viñas, Guillermo Portillas, and Francisco Espinosa, well, they were talking about the importance of using data appropriately in the memory movement. Sometimes we may think that using really big or exaggerated figures or using approximate figures, this will be positive, but then we see that that is something used against us. So I think that the law, we need to get to know it well so that we can use it, and this will help us be more efficient in our work, more take better profit of it. And the law can be considered to be better or worse or whatever. But in any case, I want to apply a realistic view on the law, and I think that we are losing the battle in the society, particularly among young people. And when we understand that it's difficult to do what we try to do, then we can have two options. You can say, we could say, mentioning just an example, it's like, let's say, like the society is like what we have here. So we need to bring the tone of our discourse up. That could be an option. But I believe that there's a second option. We need to try and we should take risks and modify the force correlation in the society, and we should address those who have not made a decision about this, are undecisive, and those who, and also dismantle the discourse of our enemies. I don't know, perhaps the two things can be done at the same time. We can consolidate our forces, bring the tone of this discourse up, and then at the same time think about how to break this dynamic. Because I've been listening about what you were saying in the education table, saying that there was a sort of 15M movement with the right wing, with the flags and, you know, all that, everything that's happening. And it's crazy. But perhaps it's easier to talk out loud about La Desbandá here because we're all convinced about that. But in any case, we need tools to be able to talk about that reality outside too. So where do I think the discourse of the enemy is growing?
It seems to me that the notion of neutrality or kind of equidistance is the same as saying no feminism or no machismo, no male chauvinism. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be equidistant? But it is something that is starting to be accepted by a wide sector of society, and we need to listen to them in order to better fight them. So sometimes we see this beast of fascism appearing because they support Franco, but most of the narrative is promoting this equidistance or this neutrality, because they are looking for challenges. They try to create obstacles. But there is a reality we all know, and it is that the vast majority of what is called the sociological Francoism is that many of us have lived a part of our lives, and we had to accommodate ourselves to a dictatorship. I was listening yesterday to the stories of life, and many people who was really strong fighters, they had to accommodate to the new reality, to the regime, to the Franco regime. So many people who suffered the Franco regime and the repression, they had to create like a fake world for them. And you couldn't say you had been a victim of reprisal, because that had implications at the time. And this is no secret. There were soldiers of the rebel army, of the Francoist army, who died as well in the combats. So there was a situation of unorganized social mobilization to fight against the rebel army. And that's a reality. So we shouldn't deny that. We have to assume it as the reality and then make the most of the resources we have. And I'm going to finish by saying there are 3 instruments that we have discussed, that we have agreed upon, and that I consider very necessary to our struggle. I think Diego must remember these. First of all, at the period of drafting of the bill, when we talked about the victims of the war and the victims of the dictatorship. And we insisted very much on this because we wanted to have a mention to the coup d'etat. So it is key, and I think it is very important that it is mentioned in the law. It is a very powerful tool for all us. For all of us. So whenever we want to teach the history in a high school, for instance, we can say that all the victims who suffered as a result of a coup d'etat that ended a constitutional regime. And this is a key approach, because if there wasn't a coup d'etat, then most of the population would have been forced to get up and fight against the rebel army. Of course, there were situations really dramatic for many families, but it is important that this is referred to in the law. Very important, and I think it's a major tool for us, because the war was not a consequence of social revolutions or all of us getting mad. No, the war is the result of a coup d'etat, a clear coup d'etat that was meant to stop a moment of democracy, an unprecedented moment in our country in terms of rights and democracy. And then I also find important the mention to other fascist regimes of Europe, and this is linked to the memory sites in order to avoid defensive reactions. For instance, the military unions of the Franco regime who protected or who acted under the protection of other countries. I was at a presentation of Instituto San Martín in Madrid, and they didn't allow the local government didn't allow the modification of the name of a street because it was the name of a Second World War unit. So this is just an example, but if you read the whole law, I think you can perceive this essential linkage to other European governments. And this is important also to prevent the anti-communism. And many people would say, well, you had the fascism at the time, but there was also the socialism at the Soviet Union who also made atrocities. And yeah, of course, they sometimes forget that in France or the United Kingdom were colonial powers, because we used to say the democratic powers, democratic countries. No, they were colonialist, and they were promoting really anti-democratic measures in other countries. in the colonized countries. I think we also mentioned this, the killing of Katyn, the soldiers of the Polish army, which is a crime that needs to be also analyzed. The atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course. And that's the principle of distinction of the international law is completely missing there by the British government. So I want to say with this that there is an anti-fascist consensus or general agreement, which is the result of a reaction against the industrial character of the Nazi fascist project that is linked with the Francoist project. I think it is important to remember this. If there is no anti-fascism, there is no democracy. We cannot see it otherwise. We cannot accept what they say. We cannot accept the equidistance, because this can lead to really evil principles or situations. And on the third place, the right to the truth, which is yet another element I find particularly essential in the law. It is a commission of the truth. This is not referred to just literally like that in the law, but it is necessary. A commission for the law, for the truth, sorry. Because they always tell us, you want to impose your truth, but no, we want the truth to be explained, to say what happened, in what context. We want to also prove that there was an extermination plan, and that the goals included also the protection of economic goals, and it was made by a minority that included not only the economic powers, but also the religious powers. And I think that all we do here is really essential in terms of justice, reparation, but it is also a way to say that the coup is not going to win. I mean, because we're going to keep living in a society with full rights and full freedoms.
Muchas gracias, Mauricio, por tu aportación. Seguro.
Thank you so much, Mauricio, for your intervention. I'm sure you had many other things to say, but I'm really grateful for you for respecting the time. Thank you so much. So, Rosa María García, she considers herself a social activist. That's what she told me, right? When she was a medicine student, she started to take part in a federation against the dictatorship, against the Franco regime. She was arrested and she spent 6 days in a security facility where she suffered tortures. She spent 3 months in the women jail of Madrid, Yeserías, and she was condemned to 2 years of prison as a result of propaganda crimes and illegal association actions also. This sentence is still valid in Spain because all the sentences from the Franco tribunals have not yet been declared void. She's part in the legal actions that are being carried out in Argentina. Proceedings related to tortures, and she has also made claims in the Spanish courts. So in March of this year, this claim got to the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. Currently, she's president of an association of prisoners and victims of reprisals of the Franco regime, an association who fights against the impunity of the crimes carried out during the Franco regime. So the floor is yours, Rosa.
Muchas gracias a la organización.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers of this amazing Congress. Thank you to Dolores Sierra as well for being so kind. I wanted to tell you about the fight for the right to justice on the public policies in the matter of memory. As you know, there has always been a public policy in terms of memory. And at the time of Franco, it was the fascist victims that had right to reparation and justice. And the other victims, the Republican victims, were just ignored. Later on, we started to think that the Civil War was a fight between siblings and that we were all more or less the same. And this idea is still working, as Mauricio just said, and it works because there are no other memory policies. There have not been other kind of memory policies. I'm going to refer to the state always, right? Because I consider the state is the level or the body that has this responsibility. Then we have political parties and whatever, but it is always the state. And the state has been broaching this topic very little by little. And I'm not going to go into the details, but from the government of Adolfo Suárez to the government of Rodríguez Zapatero, a series of laws or regulations have been adopted, for instance, to give grants or benefits to the victims of Francoism. That was passed in 1976. And then to the widows as well, of those who fought in the Republic Army. But for that, for instance, in 1979, you had to prove that your father or your husband had fought in the Republican Army. But so that was really difficult in order to have these benefits. And then we had some regulations concerning the trade unions. This led to quite controversial discussions, but they got some benefits as well. Then for those who fought in the Republican Army during the war and the police agents of the Republican Army, but for instance, the militiamen didn't have this recognition, didn't have these allowances. And then later on, there was in the general budget law, they established a single payment of around 6,000 euro, a compensation for those who had spent more than 3 years in prison and they were 60 years old. It means it was the people born from 1960 and before. So those who suffered tortures during the Franco regime didn't get to obtain this compensation. Even Aznar, he passed a law in order to give to the old political parties like the Communist Party or the Left Party to give back the assets that had been seized during the repression. So there were different instruments or laws. There was also allowances for the children of the war. And then we get to 2007 with the very famous historical memory law that has a very long name I'm not going to tell because you're going to forget it, and that is not in place anymore, and it is a law that had very few impacts actually. And now we get to law number 2022 of democratic memory that has just been passed. Above all, I have to say that for us, our association, La Comuna, and for many of the memory associations, this law brings about some progress, major progress, that are also the result of the efforts, of the claims, of all the work of the memorial movement. But there are some things missing, because for us, the victims of the Franco regime, we have waited too long. We needed more courage from the political forces. So we needed to really get what we have been claiming for so long. Justice, the word justice appears 27 times in the law, particularly in chapters 27 and 29, and this position number 3. And when we are dealing with this matter of memory, we have to be very clear about what justice means, because justice is a term that has an international definition in the international law, international humanitarian law. Of course, I have here 2 great experts in the legal field, but I'm sure they know what I'm talking about. When we talk about justice, we are talking about a tool to get the criminals to the courts, to get them to trial, and to establish proceedings, justice proceedings, because the main goal of what we call justice is to end up with impunity of these crimes. And now we'll see if this law helps us doing so. It is a right that we cannot deny, and that cannot be subject to negotiation. We cannot negotiate with this right. We cannot say, well, this is too difficult to make like this, then let's try it otherwise. No. And this has been acknowledged by the rapporteur of the United Nations for Justice. We have had 2 rapporteurs, Grave and Fabian Savioli, who had made reports on this topic. They came to Spain and made researches on this topic. So it is very sad, actually, that we had spent 45 years asking for this. During the Franco regime, there was a brutal silence that was imposed in order to prevent the victims from speaking about the terror, of course. But in democracy, this silence has still been in place. And I'd like to make you remember how after Franco died, in many villages in Andalusia, Aragon, La Rioja, many people went look for the families who were dead, the siblings who were dead. They did it alone. And from the elections of 1979, some town halls were really brave, and they made monuments, and they made tribute actions, and then at some point they stopped when there was the coup d'etat again. They were telling us, don't go too fast, don't go too fast, in 1981.
During the transition, the democratic transition that was not a model and it was not peaceful. We all know that because we were here. Here we have the brother of Arturo Ruiz, one of the people who died assassinated in a protest on the amnesty. Well, we know that it was a bloody transition, and we know that there was the participation of some parties, even left-wing parties, that participated in this silence agreement, and this was legalized in the law on amnesty because, in spite of the name it has, it does not include the claim by the left-wing organizations before Franco died and also during the transition, because their victims and perpetrators are treated equally. In one of the articles, there are two sections where there is amnesty awarded to the perpetrators with no trials, with no investigations. And nevertheless, the victims have had their sentences still valid until recently, until this new law that has been passed this month, when those sentences have been declared illegal and void. That was something that the memory movement was demanding. I'd like to say that with this law we are going to be able to bring actions against the crimes of Franco regimes. In that case, there are 23 people that are investigated, and among them Rodolfo Martín Villa, and that's in the case brought before the courts in Argentina. And I'm not sure if this law will allow us to bring those cases to Spanish courts. The law says that the state is going to make sure that the judicial system is going to go over the cases. And according to the international law, the perpetrators should be subject to extradition or otherwise submitted to trial in the country. So we want to have a judicial justice to be created that will determine what happened, not only who the victims were, but also who the perpetrators were. And the data, we know there's a problem with that, but it is the state that knows, can have access to the data. Article 3, you should read that, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of victims. In the bill, there were like 5 to 6 sections in the definition of victim, and now it has 13 different sections because of the enormous numbers of victims the dictatorship generated. And we have the example of the Argentinian dictatorship, where we can see that we can prosecute perpetrators even many years after the end of the dictatorship. Why shouldn't we do the same thing here in Spain? Why not? And I'd just like to conclude with a thought. We must always remember the history, and we must understand and remember that the men and women who fight against dictatorships and that fight totalitarian regimes, and legitimacy is with us, with those men and women who do that. We are the victims of one of the most terrible dictatorships and one of the most brutal and cruel dictatorships. So we need to continue demanding truth, justice, and reparation. And this claim is still valid.
Muchísimas gracias, Rosa.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I have no words after what you just said. And now I give the floor to Mr. Naranjo, who's a professor of history and researcher. Luis Naranjo, he's committed to historical truth and also with the incorporation of the information that is related to the Second Republic and the transition, to incorporate those data and knowledge into the curricula. And he's always said that we need to educate building with memory. He has published a great number of articles, teaching units and books. He has studied the itineraries along the Guadiato and Guadiatillo rivers, the Mediterranean path, open or border, and the testimonies of the civil war in Córdoba. Luis Naranjo is the president of the Forum of Memory in Córdoba. After everything that has been said in this panel, which has been quite a lot and very interesting, I'd like to now try to link what has been approved here with the contribution of the Andalusian law on memory of 2017. I was the general director of democratic memory of the Andalusian government. I was the first one at the time, and this memory struggle that was expressed in the law, in that law, has contributed to the national law on memory. This is the topic I'd like to discuss and to start with, and I'd like to be brief on that. And then secondly, another element that is key, and that is why the Andalusian Memory Law has been blocked and is going backwards in terms of the memory policies in Andalusia, and how to avoid this in the case of the national law that has just been passed. Well, this is the last historic opportunity for the victims of Francoism. If we fail this time, nothing will be done. It's too late, but at least it arrived. It has become a reality, and we need to make sure it won't fail, because it would be the last betrayal to the victims. Finally, secondly, I'd like to discuss another topic about the national law and the Andalusian law in relation to the Desbandá, because we need to try and solve things that are pending. The development of the legal framework should allow for the growth of this social-cultural movement that has, of course, a political facet to it, as everything that is related to history. And we need to recover the memory of the genocide between Malaga and Almeria. This needs to be consolidated. The memory movement has participated in quite an active way in the drafting of the national law. And in Andalusia, we had the similar process since 2013 and 2015 and so on. There were many assemblies at the time. Many of us met during those assemblies. And there are several aspects that were discussed at the time. So the coup d'etat, well, in the Andalusian law discussions, we already referred to that as the triggering element, as the cause, the root of the actions against the victims. It is isolated as something separate from the Spanish law and also the cause of all the violence, because without the coup d'etat there would have been no violence at all. No worker would have died, no laborer would have died, but no rich person would have died either. And none of those who were later on supporting Franco's dictatorship and the Spanish War. Also, with regards to the reference to the Republic, it is absolutely essential to make sure that we will not forget the historical legacy of the Second Republic. We must remember the values and the social and political values and principles of that period. So the Second Republic is also an essential element. And then, of course, the issue of the law on amnesty, which is one of the controversial topics. Also during the discussion for the national law. In the case of the Andalusian law, we couldn't discuss the law on amnesty, but we do refer to the report by the United Nations Commission who came to visit Andalusia, and it was said that all laws, national laws that oppose the international law that states that massive crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity may not be subject to amnesty, and it is said that any such rules should be cancelled or modified. So we had this culture of the memory that came during the last few years, but the Superior Court says that the national laws may not go against the international law, because therefore the law on amnesty may not amnesty the crimes against humanity. Well, there is a radical change here. The Zapatero's law states that it is the memory associations and the family members who should in charge of and responsible of the exhumation. So this is a sort of outsourcing of the memory. And the Andalusian law establishes this, that it is the democratic state who should be responsible of this duty of memory. And therefore, it is the administrative and political entity in charge of exhumation, also with, of course, under the control and supervision of victims' organizations and the memory movement. But exhumations may not be outsourced to associations or victims. Pablo de Grey said, rightly, that this means that the judges will not take in charge that responsibility. And this is a central issue. The national law on memory is not a new version of Zapatero's law. From the point of view of philosophy, this represents a radical change where for the first time, the state is recognized as the entity that is responsible of all memory policies, public memory policies, and of all exhumation actions. I don't want to take much longer, but there are a couple of important topics too. The creation of Andalusian Memory Council, and now we're talking about a National Memory Council. We're also referring to the creation of a memory institution or institute, also the creation of a DNA bank. And in the case of Andalusia, this has failed because there was a lack of sufficient political will in order to create such a DNA bank to be able to recover that remains of the people disappeared, and we can give them to their family members. And now we're talking about the creation of such a DNA bank at the national level, and we hope that this will truly become a reality, because otherwise the exhumation process is not complete. The capacity of the state, and in our case it was the regional government, to seize all the lands, including the lands of the municipality, for example, cemeteries, where there are rejections to exhumation, and the rights of the victims should also always be protected and being prioritized over the rights of the owners of the land. We, in our law, refer to the possibility of penalties, and in the national law there is also a penalty scheme. And the town councils who do not comply with the law, they will not receive any public subsidies. That is the penalty scheme too, and I hope this time this will be actually true. Concerning the educational policies, or the policies for education, well, there's the creation of a truth commission. We had a working group in Andalusia to find the truth, but it's actually these two are equivalent entities. We talked about that working group, but it didn't become a reality in the Andalusian case. Also, I attended the education table, and as a retired teacher, I must say that I feel really sad when I see that the Andalusian law didn't succeed at all to have a truthful narrative of what happened in the schools. I hope that will not be the case for the national law. The curriculum is already very important, but there's more than that. We also have to train the teachers. That's essential. And this is not clearly explicitly expressed in the law. You can only teach those things that you know. And if many teachers don't know what happened, and they have no information about how the recent past was built, if furthermore they are embedded by denial and by equidistance, what can they teach their students? Nothing. So this is why curriculum are so important. The curricula are key. So what should we do so that the national memory law will actually work? The regulations that accompany the law are essential. Without this, the law will be completely useless. We need the regulations that will trigger the mechanisms for the execution of the law. And that was the problem we had in Andalusia. The judges could not would not be able to take away the Franco symbols if we don't have a specific regulation for that in Andalusia. And this is what we need to do at the national level. We need that kind of regulation also to avoid losing the cases that are brought to court. Also the victims. The Spanish Parliament needs to recognize officially and publicly the political victims, and the Parliament must also recognize that there is a census of victims and that the dictatorship had those political victims. There are no judges that go to the exhumations, and the DNA is often lost. There are problems there. So we need specific rules to make sure the law is executed. Also, we need funds. Not enormous amounts of money, but sufficient funds. And also political will, of course. And in order to do that, we need to preserve and increase the political power at the national level, but also in Andalusia. Without these conditions, the national law could become a source of frustration again for us. And I hope that will not be the case. I hope so much. That will not be the case. So, to finish with, this extraordinary movement of la Desbandá, we need to reinforce the memory law in Andalusia, because the right-wing party is not stupid. So it is better for them just to block the law instead of cancelling it. So there are a couple of things that are key here. We need to work on the education to make sure that La Desbandá will be known throughout Spain and also in Europe. We need to create Center for the Interpretation of La Desbandá. I must admit that La Desbandá is a term I don't really like. The first flight, perhaps, of the population from Malaga. We need a center where we will explain the historical, political, and cultural sense of all this, its meaning. We need an exhumation plan so that the people disappeared will be found. And, well, I'll finish with that. So, basically, the legal and political framework will be very positive for all that. Let's be optimistic. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues como ven ustedes, es una mesa rica en contenido.
Well, so, as you have seen, it has been a great session with experts of very high level. I'm sure the discussion would be also really exciting, and there is much to say, but I don't know if it is possible. I don't know if we have the time.
Es que pasa lo siguiente. Yo sé.
Well, I know this session should have been longer because it is so interesting, but we do not have time. I am so sorry. There are so many hands, and it's a pity, but I think we can't